Fine, thank you. So bottom of page 88, right. We're, just to recap very quickly, we're in the middle of the chapter that speaks of the human image, which really speaks of our being essentially spiritual. We've said this many times now, that we're spiritual beings in the human experience, not human beings in a divine experience, in a spiritual experience, as many might think. We also spoke about the dichotomy of man, that we live between two worlds, the animalistic world and the angelic world, and it's our decision and our choice at every moment of the day to make the choice of being like an angel, of being like an ape, or an animal. We also spoke of the general structure of the Sephirot, of the 10 attributes, which also appear in every single human being. In each and every one of us, we have 10 attributes, 3 intellectual ones and 7 emotional ones. And they are divided into the different sides of the human body. The right side in general symbolizes chesed, kindness. The left side symbolizes justice. The middle side symbolizes harmony between justice and kindness. It's called tiferet, or beauty. But that's where we're up to, more or less. And our goal is to be so in tune with our divine self through those 10 attributes that we fulfill the meaning of the word Adam, which means human being. But Adam, as we also said, means resembling God. Domeh la'elyon. Adam coming from the word resemblance. Domeh, dimayon in Hebrew, which means that our goal is really to resemble God in all of our ways by exercising those 10 attributes in the most spiritual and divine way. That's this quick recap. Let's continue on now at the bottom of page 88. Does anyone want to read? Thus when the prophets, anyone?
I'll read, Rabbi.
Please, Barry, go for it.
Right. Thus when the prophets speak of the hand or the eyes of the Lord, it is understood that they are not speaking of essences in any way physically similar to the human hand or eye. At the same time, there is some essential connection to the body of the man. The relation between the right hand and the left hand, for instance, is a matter of profound principle, which is derived from the difference between the Sephirot of Hesed and Gevurah. And so too with all the parts of the human body in their general configuration and down to the smallest detail.
Right. Let me just pause you for 1 second, Barry, because it's important to note here what Rabbi Steinsaltz is alluding to. And that is that we can resemble God in our spiritual senses, with our spiritual being. We can't really resemble God with our bodies, with our human beings. Why? Because God doesn't have a body. When we speak, even when we speak in our prayer and in other places, when we speak of God's eyes, of God's hands, you know, the example that comes to mind is how God redeemed us from Egypt with his outstretched arm, right? Bizroa netuya, or biyado chazaka, with his strong hand. Of course, we're not referring to a hand. God does not have a body, but we are referring to the attributes that are behind those images of the hand or of the eyes, of the ears. There are spiritual senses to every physical sense. So if we were to focus on the eyes, for example, of course, when we speak of spiritual eyes, we're not speaking about this right here. These eyes, that my eyes, for example, need glasses. What we're speaking about is the vision, the ability to see beyond that which the naked eye sees. That's what we're referring to. Same here, when we're referring to the sense of hearing, we're not just referring to the ability to absorb noises or sounds. What we're referring to is our ability to listen, to connect to a person on a deeper level, in a profound way, so that we become one with him, we empathize with him. That's what hearing is spiritually. So this is true when it comes to us working on a divine being and our divine senses, and on us being like the divine, resembling the divine, again, dimayon, with the word Adam. And this is true, of course, for God himself. When we speak of God's eyes, we speak about his vision, we speak about his ears, we speak about his ability to empathize, and so on and so forth. That's really what this little paragraph is referring to. But continue just a few more sentences, and we can develop this idea. Barry, go for it.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Man may therefore be viewed as a symbol or a model of the divine essence, his entire outer and inner structure manifesting relationships and different aspects existing in that supreme essence. The secret of the
Fine, a little bit more. Go ahead.
The secret of the positive misvot, the commandments to perform certain actions, lie, in a manner of speaking, in the activation of the limbs of the body, in certain movements and certain ways of doing things, which are congruous with higher realities and higher relationships in other worlds. In fact, every movement, every gesture, every habitual pattern, and every isolated act that man does with his body has an effect in the whole systems of essences in other dimensions with and against one another.
Right. And that ability, again, belongs only to human beings. But think about it this way, just to use a poor metaphor. Right now, all of you are using computers or maybe cell phones, whatever you may be using to connect to the Zoom call. Now, the computer that you have in your hands, or the laptop, the cell phone that you have in your hand, is just a piece of metal with a few wires attached to it. What makes it a computer? Your ability to switch it on and to actually use it to connect to Zoom. That's exactly how a human body works. The human body is just a body of flesh and blood and all sorts of organs and limbs. What makes it a divine body, something divine? The mitzvahs. When we turn ourselves on to do a mitzvah, like he's saying right here, then we become what we're supposed to be. Then we become Adam. Then a human image, which is the name of this chapter here, then the human image becomes complete. Then it serves the purpose for which it was created. But if we don't turn on those switches, just like in a computer will be just that piece of metal. Does it have any usage? Maybe, but I don't know about it. It's just as good as, I don't know, another piece of metal of the inside of a wheel of a car, just as good as that. That also has a few wires. So what? But if I don't use it, if I don't turn it on, then really you're missing the image itself. You're missing the completion of the human image of Adam that's supposed to be resembling God. And that's why really that choice between going towards the angelic side or going towards the animalistic side is really a choice between making our vessel right here of flesh and blood into something worthwhile, or continuing to make it like just another body that's floating on earth. That's really the choice here. But when we dedicate it to the angelic side, when we take that choice and we do those mitzvahs, then we turn ourselves on. Then we serve the world. Then we complete the image with which that God gave us. I will say this, like he's saying here at the very end of the paragraph, that we have an effect in whole systems of essences in other dimensions with and against one another. The ability to do a mitzvah indeed doesn't have an effect. We might not be able to see it. But when I do a mitzvah, whether it's giving $1 to a poor man, I'm not just giving $1 to a poor man. It's a nice gesture, but it's not just a nice gesture. I'm changing the energy of the world. I'm bringing light, not just into another human being that needed my $1, but I'm also bringing light into that moment. I'm bringing light into that space. And because God's light is infinite, that infinity continues to shine on and on and on and on and on to eternity. So I'm doing something that really affects the world in the most cosmic way. That's the power of a mitzvah. Now, maybe to use yet another idea that's presented to us by Kabbalah, that is that, and we've spoken about this idea before, that with every mitzvah, a good angel is created. Those good angels stay with us all the time in this world and in the world to come. So just imagine that when you gave that $1 to that poor man, when you put on that tefillin, when you said that prayer, when you lit Shabbat, whatever it is, when you did that mitzvah, then you have created for yourself an angel that is with you all the time. And that angel is having an effect, again, in a very cosmic way on the whole creation of God, in this world and in the next. Just like every human being has an effect, even a scientific effect, just by being. we're creating all these influences. So too, that mitzvah and that angel has a spiritual effect forever and ever, because it's there all the time in this world and in the next. So even in that, and with that idea, we see the power, the effect that we have in whole systems of essences and the dimensions. I think that explains. Now, this is already something that some people have it, some people don't. But that explains why, you know, and by the way, I think most people have it. You can, I remember a few months ago, someone showed this to me, but you know that human beings can tell, if I would have showed you right now, 40, 50 mugshots of criminals. 40 mugshots. And now let's say 20 of them are criminals, 20 are not. And you wouldn't know which ones are which. And I would ask you, try it. You can Google those images. I'm sure you'll find them. It's a fun exercise. And I would ask you, who out of these 40 mugshots are criminals and who are not? Most people would, I mean, at least not 100% maybe, but maybe 70, 80% of the people that are criminals you'd point to. There's something in us, there's that intuition, I call it the soul of God, that is divine, that cannot be contaminated because it's so divine, that when it sees divinity, it clicks. It's like a magnet, it resonates. And that's why, because divinity has its own light. And our inner light sees that light. So when I see a criminal, that I see that that light is dimmed, then therefore I'll pick that mugshot of a criminal, even though I don't know he's a criminal. And I'll pick the mugshot of a guy that's innocent, even though I don't know that he's innocent. But that's just because, again, light is magnetized to light. And when I have this, we all have this inner light within. And when we see light, the light of a human being that's created, again, by these deeds, these good deeds, these mitzvahs that a human being does, then it clicks. Then it resonates. Then it's like these two magnets now, all of a sudden coming together. That's another impact that good deeds do. They create this light that then draws so much light towards them. I think that's, you know, that's the power of light in general. Light attracts light. And that's true for inner light too, no doubt. By the way, I want to hear your comments, your disagreements, your questions, your remarks, because this should be learning. Learning is only with discussion.
So is that the aegis of the soul? The eyes are the pathway to the soul?
In a way, yes. I mean, yeah, there's that expression, right? And there's that expression of the eyes, the windows to the soul, or something like that, right? But no doubt. I mean, our eyes can perceive so much more than what is in reality, right? And no doubt, we use our eyes. That could be that the soul uses its eyes to perceive those things. Very good. And it's true both ways, right? It's true this way and it's true this way. When people look into us, into our eyes. You know, what's fascinating about the Lubavitch Rebbe, I had the privilege of meeting a few times, and I've spoken about this, but about the light that I saw, etc. But is that everyone who met him, they all spoke about his eyes. Everyone. Whether it was Ariel Sharon who wrote a whole, and Yitzhak Rabin who wrote a whole article about it, or just, you know, simpletons. But everyone spoke about the eyes because, yes, he had such a powerful soul that it shone through his eyes too. I like that. Yeah. Yeah. Gila, what did you want to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, again, through my lens, when you talk about criminals, or you talk about people that are, you know, severely mentally ill, or you talk about people that have a injured, we could call it, I suppose, an injured soul or an injured brain,
right,
or all of the above, some form of injury, let's say, because we're all born without, you know, unless there's a specific physiological or physical illness. We look at people's faces.
Right.
And I think, Barry, what you said was really important, because if there's inconsistency in a face, for example, inconsistency between, let's say, a smile, the way the eyes look, the expression, the affect, just call it affect, which is the emotional the emotional energy that a person puts through in people that have been identified as, you know, sociopathic or psychopathic, or people that are just not very nice people, there's a level of inconsistency, lack of congruity, and lack of, more than anything else, integration of how their face manifests itself to the world. So, I mean, psychologists and forensic psychologists and all kinds of people that are studying criminal behavior and have for decades and decades find these inconsistencies. Many years ago, I worked in the prison system in Canada, and I worked with inmates and in a federal penitentiary. And I was always fascinated by the physical manifestation of the people, let's say, for example, that had committed murder. And I would look at them and study them and try to understand what it was. So I think that, Rabbi Allouche, the way you've really beautifully expressed the potential for beauty and for positive energy in the world through the use of our faces, through the use of our eyes, through the use of our words, every aspect of who we are, it hits home when you see the other side, when you see the tragedies of people that are severely disabled and injured because their brains, their neshama, something's injured. I use that term because it's not their fault.
Right.
They didn't create themselves. So, but
right.
yeah.
You're right. You're right. I mean, I like that term. Yeah, absolutely. They're injured, and it shows. It shows. You know, you don't necessarily need a lie detector sometimes for these criminals. It just shows. It's clear. You know, Malcolm Gladwell, not to bring it to that path, but Malcolm Gladwell's a whole book about it. I don't know if you've heard. Has anyone heard of the book Blink?
Yeah.
Blink. Yeah. So it's a whole book about that initial intuition where you know that something's wrong. That whether some, you know, he speaks about like in a museum placing a fake idol, I think it was a statue, whatever it was. And people knew, they stopped there for a few seconds because they knew their intuition was telling them this is something fake, even though it looked very authentic. Or whether it's people. Sometimes you just feel it. And again, that comes to emphasize this point that Rabbi Steinsaltz is making, that each time we do good, we're creating for ourselves an image of God. We're amplifying this Adam that resembles God. Each time we do bad, we're dimming this image. Now, the more you do good, the more it has an impact, not just on the people that you did good to, like that homeless guy that we spoke about, whoever it may be, but it's also, and maybe even primarily, to yourself. You're expanding your light. And that has an internal impact that goes on and on and on and on to infinity. That's the power, again. Focusing on this last line, it has an effect in whole systems of essences in either dimensions with and against one another. It's everywhere. That's really the power. And I think, again, that explains why the righteous have this incredible aura to them, because of their good deeds. It's not just, again, the impact that they had on others, but it's the impact that they had on themselves. Now, I also think that, you know, it's very hard to remain numb to children, right? We know this with children. When you have a child in the room, everyone says, oh, how cute, how lovely, and they all want to hug him and pinch his cheeks or whatever it is. Why? Did we ever ask ourselves why? And I think the deepest, I mean, there are many answers, I'm sure there are many psychological answers, but the deepest answer is because children are pure. They haven't had the opportunity to dim their lights. Their light is just as shining as it was when it was born, when their soul came down. So you can't remain numb to a light like that. Now, unfortunately, we grow up and that light is dimmed very often, again, like Gila was saying, because we're injured by all sorts of things in all sorts of places. But our duty is to continue to do good, not just to have impact on others, but that good will also have impact on us and on our light, to become a child once again, so to speak. That explains maybe why on Passover, the central theme is children. We do everything and anything for children to be engaged. Why is that? Because we are celebrating our freedom. In order to be free, we have to be able to expose our inner child and almost free him, release him. so that he can once again be as illuminating as he or she was when they were young. That's the idea of Passover that we just celebrated. But I believe again that we see this big idea in children more than in any other demographics.
Yeah.
Yes, Joyce, please.
Yeah, just on that theme very quickly is that the other, like what Gila was saying, and then with adolescents who are in pre-adjudicated, in other words, where they might have to go to prison. I think the thing is that you see by two past diagnosis, and I know you've talked about this, they're not sometimes what they are diagnosed to be. And when you see that light, like you're saying in children, it's still there. And when we speak to the soul of that child, so to speak, the child within, it illuminates, and you see a spark in their eyes that it can light up your soul when you see that. It's so powerful. So it's not to give up on these children or adolescents that are hurting, to reach inside and really see that illumination that's possible.
Right. Beautiful. Really beautiful. I'm just going to add one Kabbalistic twist to this idea, again, speaking of the eyes, and much more than the eyes, right? It's the vision, etc. But it's interesting to note that the word for eyes in Hebrew is ayin, or enaim, which is, by the way, the same word as the word for wellspring, ma'ayan. Why? Because in a way, your eyes are like a wellspring. They can be filled with water that's flowing and nourishing the world. Or they can, God forbid, suffer a drought, and then you see it in the eyes too. It's your ability to extract your waters and nourish them to the world that makes your eyes so special, just like a wellspring. So that's the other idea, ayin and mayan. Yes, Ila.
I apologize, I didn't mean
Yeah,
to
sure,
interrupt.
please.
I think one of the most, extraordinary things that I've learned about from you and from Judaism in general is that Hashem responds to tears, the water in our eyes. And when you talk about wellspring, it makes me realize that, and I've always believed that crying, and I see a lot of crying in my practice, crying is such a gift. And when people say, I can't cry anymore, you want them to cry. You want to help them cry, because truly, not only is it a catharsis, a liberating physiological event, but it really, as you say, it connects to Hashem. Hashem, can you just expound for a minute on the tears and how Hashem responds to tears?
Yes, sure. So you remind me of the Talmudic statement that says that Sha'arei Dma'ot lo ninalu, which means that the gates of tears can never be locked. That God's heart, so to speak, right? We said that God doesn't have any limbs, but God's heart melts when he sees tears, when he feels tears. And even if gates are locked, these tears can burst those gates open. That's one idea, and that's what you're also referring to. But there's this idea also that tears, I remember meeting this most bizarre person. I remember that we were studying in Milano, Italy, when I was studying for my rabbinic ordination. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, a man walks into the yeshiva, and he's an artist, and he tries to sell some of his art, and then he shows us some of his. One of his poems, I'll never forget, was a poem that touched me, but it was called Tears Shed Eyes. Instead of adding tears, right? Tears shed eyes, because there's this power of tears also to clean the eyes, so to speak. That once you cry, you see the world differently. Those tears washed your eyes. And so it's not a power from, from you to the heavens, of opening the gates, but it's from you to yourself. It's those tears that can really wash your eyes and in a way elevate them. So that they then see the world in a very different way. I remember that, just to add a little story to this, but there's a great story about Elie Wiesel and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that Elie Wiesel, who suffered, as we all know, in the Holocaust, once attended the Farbrengen, a Cassidy gathering of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he told the Lubavitcher Rebbe that he forgot how to cry, and he's asking the Rebbe for a blessing. Please make me able to cry again. And the Rebbe's response was beautiful, and he said, I can teach you that, but I have something deeper to teach you. I want to teach you how to sing. He says, crying is good. Crying opens the gates. But the master key is song, is joy. So I'm going to teach you how to sing. And then they started singing Niggin together. And during that Farbrengen, Elie Wiesel says that he underwent a transformative experience. But tears shed eyes. But there's something else that is even more powerful. And that's the song of our souls. To know how to sing that song. To know how to bring its melody to the world. That's something even deeper. That again, so tears do create the slide, if that's the context that we're speaking in. But I think what creates the slide even more so is our joy, is our passion, much more than tears. Tears are good for very specific things and for very specific times. But joy is good for all the time, throughout the year. It's interesting, the Jewish calendar is built that way. We're told that there are days in which we should cry. Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, where we commemorate the destruction of the temples, then we have to cry. When a person experiences death in his close circle, they should cry. And there's days for mourning. There's the Shiva, the Shloshim, etc. But those days to cry are very specific. 24 hours. Again, Shiva is 7 days. Very specific. To linger in pain and in tears, that's not something we want. There's something much more powerful than tears. And that's joy. If duet Hashem b'simcha, we say that we have to worship God at all times with happiness. That is not compartmentalized. That is the duty of the soul at all times. And that, in a way, like the Rebbe was saying to Elie Wiesel, creates this light even more than tears.
Mm-hmm.
Deborah, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, there's a few things that I wanted to say in terms of tears. I know emotionally when we're crying, we're releasing certain chemicals and all of that, through our tears. That's scientifically proven. The other thing, that this brings up for me is, like the tears of joys or the tears of connection, when you hear beautiful music or when you're hearing a melody or connecting in terms of the Hebrew language, and there will be tears coming.
Right.
So, just commenting in both of those ways, tears.
No, you're right, beautiful. Yeah, tears of sadness and there's tears of joy.
Mm-hmm.
There's tears of joy that sometimes come unexpectedly. Mm-hmm. But I think they come again because if our soul is like that magnet we were speaking about, when it faces another magnet of a soul, it reacts. And sometimes it reacts again unexpectedly, but it reacts with tears.
Rabbi Allouche?
Yes.
I don't know what happened to my pictures, so.
Okay.
What is that? Can you explain, like when a baby's born and it cries? Is that does it have anything to do with what?
Yeah, so it's interesting because that's what everyone waits for, right? The cry of the baby.
Right, exactly. Right.
It's good.
Until they don't let you sleep at night.
Right. So the cry there is related to the breath of the baby, but then we know he's breathing. We say that that's the moment of that the soul entered that tiny little body, because the soul is God's breath. That's what the word for soul in Hebrew means. The word for soul, neshama, is the same word as the word for breath, which is neshima, because our soul is the breath of God, and it really is rooted in the story of the creation of Adam, where God took Adam's body that he had created, vaypach ba'apav nishmat chaim, it says, and he blew into his nostrils living soul, nishmat chaim. So God's breath entered his nostril, and therefore we believe enters our nostril too. when we come to life in this world. And that becomes a living soul. So that first cry of the baby is that moment of entry, the entry of the soul into that body. It's a very special cry. It's the most divine cry. What's interesting is this, and I've you know, unfortunately as a rabbi, you attend deaths, and some of you may know, but during the moment of death, there's that breath, that final breath that makes a noise, makes like an exasperated noise. And that's when that breath that first came in, when we were tiny little babies, when we came out of our mother's womb, that breath then is returned to God, that soul leaves our body. That's the sound of that breath. We shouldn't know of these experiences, the latter ones, not the first ones. Yes, many we should know of many. The latter experiences we shouldn't know of, but that's where that breath comes from. But again, that soul, that breath, that cry is you know, that cry, is a language of the soul, is a language of that breath, so to speak. But again, you have cries of tears and of sadness, and you have cries of joy. But both are languages of soul. But the soul we should be trained much more towards cries of tears the tears of joy than the of sadness. I will say this also. You know, we quoted before that the Talmud is a powerful line by the Kotzker Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, who was a seeker of truth. We mentioned him many times, but he asks a question on the Talmudic statement that we mentioned before, because we said that the gates of tears are never closed, right? If you have tears, they open up, they're always open. The gates of tears are never closed. So he asked the question, then why needs? These are gates of tears, and tears are always allowed in. You don't need gates. The whole purpose of having gates is to close them from time to time. But if you're never going to close the gates of tears, then why have gates altogether? Good question, right? So he answers very powerfully, and this is the Kotzker Rebbe, who again was a seeker of truth. He says, yes, they do close. You know when? For fake tears. For fake tears, they do close. If you're acting up, that's not the language of the soul. That's crocodile tears, as they call them. And then the gates close. God doesn't like fakeness.
Yeah.
So he'll close those gates. But anyway, that's the Kotzker Rebbe on that Talmudic statement. All right, any other comment before we continue? Heidi, please.
Yeah, this might be too divergent, but it crossed my mind, if a baby is stillborn and never takes a breath, does that mean it doesn't have a soul? And I always thought a soul was kind of assigned and came down to be born. You know, at conception, the soul is like assigned or chosen or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
So what about that?
Excellent question. Excellent question. And I know, unfortunately, I know the answer to this question because it's a question I asked close to 2 years ago. My sister's son was born in a dire situation, and we should pray for his recovery and dedicate this class also for him, and because he didn't cry. And until today, he hasn't cried. He's in a semi-vegetative state. He didn't have oxygen for about 2 hours at the moment of his birth, and he didn't cry. But he did make a little noise. And until today, he makes these noises. So it doesn't necessarily come in the form of a cry. Sometimes it comes in the form of just a hiccup or whatever it may be. It's more on the strength of the body, if we hear a cry or not, than the strength of the soul. The soul comes in, and that's my answer to your question. The soul comes in no matter what. Sometimes we hear it, and sometimes the body is in such a dire state that we don't hear it. But the soul, yeah. Good question. Okay. All right, let's continue on a little bit more here on page 89, at least in this edition, with the line starting with, clearly an ordinary person does not know anything of this. Does anyone want to read?
Sure, I'll read.
You see it? Yeah, please, Deborah, go for it.
Okay. Clearly, an ordinary person does not know anything of this. At best, he's conscious only to a very small degree of the things he does and of their higher significance. Even among those few who are able to unravel the riddle and know the meaning of these secrets, only select individuals reach that state of being where knowledge is automatically lived out and manifested. It is a state where every act of a mitzvah or an movement or a dance expresses knowingly and unknowingly the higher relationships following on analogous parts of the body in their separate as well as their total effects. You want me to continue?
Right. No, it's powerful. I'm just pondering on this, and it's true. I mean, we walk the world with a very limited ability to actually see these things that we're speaking about, and most people don't see it. There are the righteous, there are the fortunate that do see it, and if only we had the power to see these things, I think we'd be so much more engaged in mitzvot than not. Rabbi Adin, another Hasidic master, once came with a big complaint to God. And he said, God, you might get upset when you see your people sin, but your children are not sinning because of them. They're sinning because of you. And he explained himself. He said, look, you created the world in a way that the material world can be seen and the spiritual world cannot be seen. If you had created the world the opposite way, that the spiritual world can be seen and the material world cannot be seen, I promise you no one would have sinned. Because the spiritual world is so rich, and therefore would become so tempting that no one would want a material world that cannot be seen. So God, it's your fault. He was known as the advocate for his people, of course, because of his ability to always find good things to say. But it's true. If we were aware of the power of the spiritual world, we would be completely engaged in it 24/7. You know, it is said by other Hasidic masters that when Mashiach comes, we will long for these days of exile. How could we long for these days where bad is prevalent, where evil still rears its ugly head? Why? Then we will have such a shift of consciousness where we'll be able to see divinity, as we spoke about in, I think, the previous class, that we'll be able to see also the power of our spiritual deeds during exile, what we could not have seen today. Then we will say, oh gosh, I wish I could have done more mitzvot. I wish I could have done more good. Because then we'll be able to see that. Unfortunately, we can't. This is what Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying that. And the material world is much more tempting than the spiritual world. But if we knew the power of this, then there wouldn't be any question whatsoever that we would be completely engaged in the spiritual world. And I have a personal complaint to further the complaint of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev, because we know the Talmud says, "Im rishonim ke malachim anachnu kibnei adam, ve'im rishonim kibnei adam anachnu kechamorim ve'lo kechamoro shel Pinchas ben Yair," which means if the first generations were like angels because of the degradation of generations, then if they were like angels, we were like just human beings. And if they were like human beings, then we are like donkeys, and not like the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair, who was a Mishnaic sage, who had a holy donkey that could speak. Not a donkey like that. We would be like, we are, if they were just like human beings, then because of the degradation of generations, we're just like donkeys, like regular donkeys. Now, that furthers the complaint of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev. Indeed, if God puts us in a world where from generation to generation, the materialistic world gets more and more developed and therefore more and more tempting, and the generations are further and further from Sinai and further from holiness, then what does he expect of us? He should come on, give us a break, or enrich our world with a spiritual ray of light. Something, do something, God. You can't leave us in such a state. It's just not fair. On the other hand, that's also why I have to share with you the midrash that says that before Moses died, he was shown all generations to come. He was shown the whole future. And when he came to the generation before the Messiah, before the coming of the Messiah, which we believe is our generation, then his face, which means that his face turned colors. Came green, blue, red, white. And God asked him, what happened? Why are you all of a sudden so embarrassed? And Moses responded, because if I were to live in that generation, our generation, I would not be able to withstand the temptations. So friends, if you are able to withstand the temptations, then you're better than Moses in many ways.
So Rabbi, is our conscience,
Yes.
is that an inherent aspect of the conversation of our soul, or is it merely patterns that we learn from our parents?
That's a good question. I think it's both. It's certainly, and maybe mostly, what we cultivate right here. And it's also, you know, what we receive from our parents. I mean, education is certainly a factor, and many psychologists would agree, in the upbringing of a person, in the maturation of a person, right? So I think it's both. But if we don't receive the right education, it doesn't mean that we can play victims the rest of our life. But it may be sometimes. And we have to find that moment in which we shake the things off and we say, all right, it's time to own myself and to allow for the soul to emerge and to prevail. Yeah. But it's true that there is a degradation of generations. I have tremendous, I mean, you know, we live in a generation where chaos is everywhere. And the young generation seems to be even more confused. But I'm a big advocate for this young, I have to tell you, I mean, I don't know how you feel. People are very judgmental. These young people, look at the young generation, look how terrible they are. And when we were growing up, we would never be like that. I say the opposite. They face challenges that history has never faced. They're in a level that I think is the lowest of all times. And yet they still maintain sanity and purity. To me, that shows how brave they are, the inner strength that they have. And I think that's the eyes with which we should see them. It's not, yes, Joyce, please.
I think of them as what you're saying, Rabbi. I'm happy hearing this because I think of them as warriors. Because they face such challenges of today, and those challenges are like the temptation, but those are also enemies. You know, they try to steal the souls of the children. When they rise above it and they fight it, it's like I see them as warriors. And sometimes in the children that I would see, the teenager would be the most maybe going towards violence. I would say to them, do you know what a warrior is? And start talking about warriors. You see something shift. And I'm not saying I'm a simple person, I don't have the answers, but I think that when you just said that, I just immediately saw warriors.
Right. It's true. I mean, they need that strength of warriors, of real warriors. Right.
Real.
Right. No, very good. Thank you. That's absolutely true. Right. And therefore, we have to help them even more. I think we have to dedicate ourselves and love them even more.
Rabbi, I was just going to add, just one quick comment, and that is, and I'm sure you've said it many times, and I've heard it many times, when our children don't believe in themselves, then it's the greatest opportunity for us to believe in them. Right. So that's really what you're saying, is that we have the power, as Joyce said so eloquently, to really grab that spark of goodness and that spark of hope and help it grow. Right. Because when children become despondent or adolescents become despondent, they can drift into terrible situations. But if the parents and the mentors and the rabbis and the teachers continue to believe in them, there's a good chance that fire will catch, and they'll start believing in themselves. Sometimes it takes a long time. Right.
No, very well said. And of course, it all connects, because when we see that, whether it's happening to our children, to our adolescents, or even to ourselves, you know, we have a choice. We can judge ourselves by our bodies. We can judge ourselves by our souls. We can judge ourselves by its bodies, and then all we'll see is physical ailments, or we can judge ourselves by our souls, and then all we see is infinite potential. And these children have to be seen with those eyes, and we have to see ourselves with those eyes. And that's what Rabbi Steinsaltz is trying to do here in this chapter, I believe, with the human image. That he's trying to redefine the human being as a spiritual being with a soul that has the power to affect the world in the most cosmic way possible. And therefore, let's focus on that. Let's unleash it. Let's ensure that it's exposed to the best of our abilities in ourselves and in others. And what better message for these times, for the coronavirus times, where we do face challenges, no doubt, some more than others. But if we can constantly believe in our souls and unleash its power and its rays of light, then no doubt we'll be able to overcome these challenges and spread out in ways that eyes will never be able to see.